for today, Robin Bandy and Ken Bennett. Robin is currently the program manager and senior affiliate faculty at the Fairbanks Center for Medical Ethics. She completed her law degree and master's in bioethics in Indiana University. And she came to us back when she was, I think, a master's student. Is that right? It was the first of 3 programs she did with the Fairbanks Center. And I had the pleasure of assisting her with some wonderful research she did on the experience of unbefriended adults in our hospital. And she learned a great deal and published a great deal on their experience here in the hospital. She then took that amazing knowledge that she'd gained in order to found the Wishard Volunteer Advocates Program and was the founding director of that program. She was also an adjunct lecturer in the Department of Philosophy at Indiana University in Indianapolis, an adjunct assistant professor in the Division of General Internal Medicine and Geriatrics, and wonderfully our program manager for the last year, and we are so delighted to have her in our center. So she'll be speaking today, and then also Harry Kennard Bennett, or Ken. He's a 1979 graduate of Wabash College and a 1982 graduate of the McKinney School of Law here in Indianapolis, and he has practiced almost exclusively in the field of elder law since 1991, with a concentration in courtroom advocacy for at-risk elders. In 2013, Ken launched the Center for At-Risk Elders, or CARE, which is a nonprofit, lawyer-led team of advocates guarding Indiana's neglected, abused, and exploited elders. One of the cornerstone programs is the CARE Volunteer Advocates Program, and as they'll explain, this was transitioned from Wishard out into this nonprofit CARE, where Ken now directs the program. This is one of 2 programs that's part of Ken's center, including the CARE Family Guardian Program, provides pro bono legal assistance to families and friends that are suitable, able, and willing to serve in the guardianship role. And CARE prides itself in leading the way in best practices in guardianship law in Indiana. Ken is an active participant in the legal community, including is editor of NAELA Quarterly, has served as president of the local chapter of the Alzheimer's Association, and has served as adjunct faculty of the Indiana University School of Liberal Arts at IUPUI, teaching constitutional law. He's a frequent continuing education speaker on guardianship, nursing home, and elder law topics. I think you're really going to enjoy both of these speakers today, so please join me in welcoming Robin and Ken.
Hi, everybody. So you've probably guessed I'm going to go first here. Basically, as Lexi said, prior to my time at Fairbanks Center for Medical Ethics, I was the director of the Wishard Volunteer Advocates Program. We created that program in 2010, as you can probably guess, to provide guardianship services to adult incapacitated patients who would come into the hospital, and we would find out that they couldn't make their own decisions and they didn't have an appropriate surrogate decision maker. Now, that program has since moved to CARE, as Lexi said, and what we're going to do today, how we're going to split this up, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Volunteer Advocates Program model, because that is the model that Indiana as a state has adopted as the preferred solution for adult guardianship services for unbefriended patients. So we're going to talk about that. I'm also going to share some results from a retrospective study that we did using the first 2 years of data collected from our first 50 patients that were enrolled in the Wishard Volunteer Advocates Program, and it's pretty interesting data. It's soon to be published in the Journal of American Geriatrics. And then after I'm finished with my portion, I'm going to have Ken come up and talk about where the Volunteer Advocates Program is now and what that looks like. Ken is also going to talk to you about how he is spearheading efforts to expand guardianship services for the unbefriended in Marion County. We're going to hopefully save some room at the end for some questions. I would encourage you, if you have any questions about guardianship, about powers of attorney, about how all that works, you've got Ken here today, so I would encourage you to ask those questions because he has a lot of knowledge in that area. The first thing I want to get started with, though, we probably got to start with just a little bit of background. So why do we even need a guardian for somebody who can't make their own medical decisions when they're in the hospital? Guardianship is actually the mechanism that Indiana has chosen to use. Some states actually will have statutes that allow ethics committees to make decisions for the patients while they're in the hospital. Other states allow attending physicians to do that. Indiana uses the guardianship mechanism. Basically, we go to the probate court in the county where the facility providing health care is located and have the court appoint a decision maker for someone who doesn't have a power of attorney, a healthcare representative, or an appropriate family decision maker, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So our guardianship population that we usually see is our adults who have dementia, are developmentally disabled. These are the people who are born with a developmental disability, have never really had capacity to make their decisions, and all of a sudden they hit 18 years old, and mom and dad can't do some of the stuff for them anymore legally, because legally they're an adult, even though they're still not able to make their decisions. We also see a population that suffer from a mental illness that causes incapacity. So mental illness in itself doesn't require guardianship, but some patients with mental illness become so incapacitated that they need a guardianship. What we're going to talk about today are adult guardianships. We're not talking about the guardianships for minors, because that's a whole different area there. So we are focused on adult guardianship services for unbefriended patients. So why would somebody actually need a guardian? So as some of you, I recognize some of you social workers and case managers in the room as people I've worked with frequently, either to obtain a guardianship or it has come through as an issue on an ethics consult. And I think some of you can very well recognize that sometimes our family members also will need a guardianship. So I'm going to talk about that just for a few minutes. So a family member sometimes might not be authorized under our healthcare consent law. So Indiana's healthcare consent law is pretty restrictive in who it allows to make medical decisions if there's been no power of attorney or healthcare representative appointed beforehand, before someone loses capacity. So Indiana allows a spouse, parent, adult child, or adult sibling to make those decisions. There's no hierarchy there. There's no extension like extended family, domestic partner, next of kin, friend. Some states have that, Indiana does not. So if you have a family member like a cousin or a grandchild, they are not in the state of Indiana legally authorized to make decisions for someone, even though they may have been a very appropriate caregiver for that patient. Also, a family member, say a son or daughter, may be authorized to make medical decisions, but they're not on mom or dad's bank account. They can't do business for them. And in order to do that without a previous power of attorney being completed, they have to go to court to get a conservatorship, or in Indiana, it's known as a guardianship of the estate. Then also, as some of you might very well know, facilities don't like to take patients who are incapacitated, who have behavioral issues, where they're trying to walk out of the facility. They want a guardian with the legal authority to say, yes, it's okay. My mom needs to be in a locked facility, or needs to have a wander guard on her ankle. The facilities want somebody with legal authority, and we frequently run into that, to some pushback from the extended care facilities. And then I'm going to get to what I call stranger guardians. So it's very nice when we have a family member or a friend who will step up and be a guardian for our patients, but that doesn't always happen. So we're going to talk a little bit about what those stranger guardians look like in Indiana and what the unbefriended populations look like. So the unbefriended, what I refer to as unbefriended, are incapacitated adults or seniors, unable to make their own health care decisions, and they lack a legally authorized or appropriate decision maker. And the reason that I have these two terms bolded is because one thing that we found in our program, and you'll see this from the data that I share in a few minutes, these people aren't really alone. I think some people think of unbefriended as people who have outlived their family members and they're completely alone, but most of these people have someone involved in their life, and they're not always appropriately involved in their life, even if they're a family member. As you'll see, we had a significant number of our patients where Adult Protective Services was involved because a family member was exploiting or abusing or neglecting or just using the Social Security check. So they're not typically what you would think of as patients who are truly alone. So one of the things that's really gained some attention in the literature is what kind of risks these unbefriended patients could be up against when they're hospitalized. And one of those risks is undertreatment and overtreatment. And I'll give you what I think is a good example. We frequently get an ethics consult where a guardianship is in place and care has been called and all that's taking place, but a weekend's approaching and it would be in the best interest of the patient medically if a DNR order was written. We can't do that, at least in Indiana, without a decision maker. So that's the kind of things we run up against. We can't make that medical decision without a surrogate decision maker until that guardian is appointed. Also, we have unnecessary hospital days for these patients. And, it's really not good for somebody who's ready to be discharged and go to a facility. It's not good for them to have to stay into the hospital. So with our unnecessary hospital days, if we don't have somebody who can consent to discharge and try to work with the social worker to find a facility, that patient just stays here. And we frequently see that delay when we don't have that decision maker on board. Another reason the Unbefriended are getting a lot of attention is because hospital systems, with our new Affordable Care Act and some of the restrictions, and everybody's trying to pinch pennies, one of the things hospitals are really focused on now is preventing readmissions and focused on community health, focused on how those patients are getting their health care when they're not in the hospital. And this is a big issue for the Unbefriended. And also I have this quote, too, from a recent article that said that, the Unbefriended are a large portion of ethics consultation. And we see that a lot here in the IU Health System, and I know they do at Eskenazi Health, too. So some of the potential solutions that are floating around in the literature are to establish offices of public guardianship. Indiana, like Illinois and Kentucky, does not have a public guardianship system. And by public guardianship, I mean something that is a state-run public guardianship program where it's funded and overseen by the state. One of the problems with these public guardianship programs that's pretty well documented in the literature is that these caseloads are really high. There aren't a lot of paid case management staff, and the ones that they do have are poorly trained. Also, the availability of the guardians. If you've got a guardianship caseload of 1 to 200 patients, it's very hard to get to know that patient, get to know their preferences, work with the facility. It's basically usually just a phone call for healthcare decisions or any other kind of decisions. Another thing that people don't really like, but I found it very beneficial here in Marion County in Indiana, is the use of temporary guardianships. I'll explain why I like it, but you'll find in the literature that people are very concerned about just being able to walk into a judge's office with a petition and having that guardianship ordered on the spot pending a later hearing. There are due process concerns with that, and that's very well documented in the literature. Another suggestion, and this is one that was in a fairly recent couple of articles, were to have ethics committees make these decisions. As you'll see when I share the data from the Volunteer Advocates Program, this isn't really just about an immediate healthcare decision in a hospital. It's what most affects us when we're here at the hospital and trying to get those patients discharged to a facility, or when we need somebody to consent to procedures. But these patients need much more done for them than just healthcare decisions, and I'll share a little bit more about that in a minute. Another thing is, another recommendation is for attending physicians to make those decisions, and only about 6 states allow that, and it's kind of restricted. Okay, so as I said, in Indiana, we don't have what's called a public guardianship program. Most of our guardianship services for adults are provided by social service agencies like Families First Indiana and like Mental Health America. These programs do a remarkable job and keep their caseload low. Both organizations, I know, their case managers are nationally certified guardians, and they do a wonderful job, like I said, but they're very limited. They get very restricted federal and state dollars that decrease every year, and they depend a lot on grant funds, which are really subject to a lot of change. So another option, too, is a privately run guardianship program. What I mean by that is somebody who privately owns that guardianship program and employs the guardians. There's a rather large one here that serves Marion County and surrounding counties. Again, the concern with that type of program is the caseload, and that's also because the guardianship fee in Indiana is $35. And by guardianship fee, I mean under Medicaid, guardians are allowed reimbursement of $35 a month as their payment for somebody that's on Medicaid and in a facility. What we'll find, too, most of these people go into an extended care facility and they're on Medicaid. So that reimbursement fee is only $35. So you've got to rack up a large number of patients, or actually the correct term legally is a ward, but I prefer patients working at a hospital. But you've got to have a lot of those patients in order to get any kind of that reimbursement. Now, Indiana is pretty unique in the fact that we actually have a statute that allows for creation of what we call volunteer advocates programs for seniors and for incapacitated adults. This program was started, I think it actually was enacted in 2006. It allows a municipality or a nonprofit organization to create a volunteer advocates program. It requires that the volunteer advocates be trained as guardians, and it requires approval by the probate court where that program will be petitioning for guardianship. So it is, you're held accountable there by the court, not just for your guardianships, but for your training program and the quality of the advocates that you're actually appointing as guardians. I want to say just a bit about this Indiana Adult Guardianship Services Task Force. Ken's going to talk a little bit about that later. This task force has been working for several years trying to find a good solution for this ever-increasing population of what we call unbefriended patients. We're seeing a big increase because of our aging population and because of the increase in the numbers of people with mental illness. And so this task force has been working on a solution for guardianship services and are promoting this volunteer advocates model that we're going to talk about today. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit. So the Volunteer Advocates Program at Wishard was started in 2010 to provide services to incapacitated, unbefriended patients. Over that time period, we served what was then Wishard Health, what is now Eskenazi Health. We served Wishard and we served IU Health hospitals. And we used paid legal and case management staff. By that, for the first 2 years, I mean me, and sometimes a part-time assistant. So we also used trained volunteers. And when I say trained volunteers, I just want to tell you, we developed a really extended training curriculum for these volunteer advocates, which included training on the disease states that some of their patients may have, like dementia, mental illness. We did a couple sessions actually on medical ethics to help them walk through how in the world they were going to make decisions for people they didn't even know. And we also taught them how to do Medicaid applications. Collect the documentation. We would actually do the Medicaid application, but that was one of the more enjoyable sessions there. But we had a really good training curriculum for these volunteer advocates, and we wanted them to be comfortable in making decisions for their patients, even though they were very well supervised by the case manager, me again. We also used our petitions for temporary guardianship to get the volunteer advocates to get our guardianship program appointed right away. So basically what we would do, we would get a referral, usually for an inpatient hospitalized patient. We would get the referral, draft that petition, and go to court, go down to the Marion County Probate Court during open hours, and we would walk out with a temporary order for guardianship. And we would be able to make decisions and act on that same day. We were usually able to process those within 24 to 48 hours. Now, we did that pending a hearing. The Marion County Probate Court sees most adult guardianships, or the most adult guardianships, in the state of Indiana. So to wait for a hearing, if it's not set as an emergency hearing, they're about 60 to 90 days out. So that was really a benefit to the patient, to the hospital, and to us to be able to use that temporary guardianship method. And that's why I explained that I like that, and I liked the temporary guardianship method, and I think it was very efficient. We also, with our program, we were able to partner with researchers from IU Center for Aging Research to conduct program evaluation and to collect data for research purposes. As far as I know, among the volunteer advocates programs that have started in Indiana, we're the only program that actually did that has looked back at the data that we collected and have been able to report on that. So I want to share a little bit of that data with you right now. We did a retrospective review of the first 50 patients that enrolled over the first 2 years. Most of these patients were white males. The average age was 67 years old, with a range from 22 to 90. Our 22-year-old that we had, he was actually a trauma patient, and he ended up recovering, and we were able to terminate the guardianship. So that was very fortunate. But that's kind of the range that we saw there. We didn't just take people who are incapacitated due to dementia. We would take trauma patients and people who were incapacitated for other reasons, as long as they were adults. The most frequent cause of incapacitation, though, during that target hospitalization was dementia. Once somebody realized that person was incapacitated and couldn't make decisions, that's usually what was found, was that it was due to some type of dementia. So 80% of these first 50 patients were discharged to the nursing facility. So these aren't people who were just hospitalized and needed medical decisions made then. They were going into a facility and then back to the hospital in some cases. So with all of those people going out into the extended care facility, one thing that we found was very important was to have very good relationships with our nursing facilities, and we were able to establish that. Out of the 50 people, as I explained, when we take that temporary guardianship and get that order that very first day, we set a guardianship hearing. And if the person lives, some of these patients were very, very ill, if the patient lives to that time, then we appoint a permanent guardianship. Of those 50 people, the Wishard Volunteer Advocates Program kept 24 for permanent guardianship. 11 died prior to that guardianship hearing. 7, we were able to reunite with a family or friend that took permanent guardianship. 3 of them regained capacity, and we were not racking up numbers here. If we could actually terminate a guardianship for a patient, if that was appropriate, we went back and did that. And then one of them, we located a young girl's mother prior to the permanent guardianship hearing, and she stepped in and made medical decisions. 42% of this first 50 actually had a family member involved in their life that wasn't appointed as guardian. This was due to a number of reasons. Some of these people were just barely hanging on themselves. There's no way that they could actually act for a family member and make these complicated decisions. Some of them were just really inappropriate, and APS was involved in their case for exploitation or for neglect or abuse. But this goes back to what I said before. These people aren't truly alone. There's someone there in their lives, and most often, sadly, we found that it was somebody who was taking advantage of them. 44% of cases had APS involved at the time of the target hospitalization. Now, we also looked at healthcare utilization, and when we did this for this first 50 patients, we actually looked at their healthcare utilization the 6 months prior to VAP enrollment and the 6 months after. And what we found was that the emergency room visits decreased from 24 to 15%. Hospitalizations decreased from 27 to 17%, and the total number of transitions decreased from 133 to 82. So when I say transitions, what I mean is most of these transitions that were happening prior to VAP enrollment, these were people who were going from home to ER, home to hospital, a lot, before they were enrolled in the VAP. Of the 9 patients who died during the target hospitalization, all of them had a do not resuscitate order at the time of death. None of them were resuscitated, and all of them had an active comfort care plan documented in their chart at the time of death. One of the things that I think is really important, too, that the Volunteer Advocates Program was able to do, we were able to enroll Medicaid for several of the patients who were eligible for Medicaid, but for whatever reason, they had not been able to do an application. So I think this was very important for a couple of reasons. So those people who, many of our people were dually eligible for Medicare and Medicaid, but those people who did not have Medicaid, we were able to secure some payment for the hospitals for the target hospitalization. And in fact, that payment amounted into about $285,000 of reimbursement for the hospital. If it were not for the program being able to go through and collect the necessary documents needed for a Medicaid application, that reimbursement would not have come in. Another reason that that's important is because extended care facilities, they want a payer source. And as most of you know, Medicare does not pay for extended care facilities. Medicaid does, or you have to have your own money. That's just a tip for everybody out there. Be independently wealthy or you're going to need Medicaid for long-term care. So we also were able to secure a payer source for extended care, which helped us with getting the patients out of the hospital. It helped us with that discharge. We were able, with several patients that we had for Medicaid pending, once the facility knew that there was a guardian who was going to go and collect the birth certificate and the bank statements and the life insurance policy if there was one. Once those facilities knew that somebody was going to do that and be responsible for it, they would let us admit the patient to the extended care facility with Medicaid pending. So I want to talk a little bit about the VAP responsibilities, and again, this goes to what I said before. These people didn't just need healthcare decisions. Our volunteer advocates, under the supervision of the paid case management staff, again, me, for the first 2 years. So they actually they arranged burial arrangements, they moved apartments, they did pet rescue. Seriously, they did pet rescue. They purchased clothing, they went to care conferences at the hospital and the nursing facilities. We managed bank accounts and sold cars. We were able to get outside counsel to help for those people who had larger sums of money in real estate, which we kind of got a couple of surprises when we got guardianship and were able to do some digging. We had some people who had some considerable sums of money that needed managed. We assisted with APS investigations. I learned more about criminal law than I ever want to know. We recovered stolen funds in several circumstances. And we were able to reunite when it was appropriate. We really made a priority of trying to reunite these patients with people who they had relationships with that were appropriate. Now, the best way that I can describe what a volunteer advocate does, because I'm really hoping actually that Ken will make a pitch to some of you to become volunteer advocates. But the way I can describe what a volunteer advocate does, what they do actually, is just to tell a story, okay? So I'm going to tell the story of Earl. Don't worry, he's been deceased for a couple months, and this picture's okay. Earl came to us. He was a 90-year-old man with dementia. He'd been hit downtown after somebody tried to rob him, although he didn't have anything, but they didn't know that. He came to us as a referral from APS. He was brought to Methodist. And when we did some digging after we got the guardianship, we were able to find out that he was living in his car, and there was a downtown bar owner who was feeding him, which was good. The other thing that I want to say about Earl, he had outlived his family and friends. So I think when we think of a typical unbefriended person, this was Earl. He had served in a couple of wars. He had a normal life. He had been married to Ida, and he had just outlived everybody. One thing that we were able to do with him, that his volunteer advocate was able to do, was to make contact with extended family in West Virginia, but they were old and ill themselves, and they couldn't provide any support. So, but we at least let them know where Earl was and that he was okay. The volunteer advocate also immediately went and found him an appropriate facility that was close to her because she visited once a week. Our advocates were required to visit once a month, but most of the advocates visited every 1 to 2 weeks. She immediately consented to a DNR order at the facility because of Earl's frail condition. She also participated in all of the holiday parties and birthday parties where family and guests were welcome at the facility. And she also took Earl his favorite snack every week of near beer and pickle loaf. Do y'all know what that is? It's like bologna with the little specks of pimento and olive and stuff in it. He absolutely loved that. I'm not sure that it was good for his diet, but he was 90, and he kept telling me he had to die sometime. So he got his pickle loaf and near beer. One of the things that the program did for him, he had about $6,000 in a checking account. We were able to spend that down for Medicaid purposes, get him on Medicaid. We sold his little car, and we're able to use some of that money to buy him a TV, buy him a chair, which his volunteer advocate facilitated all of those purchases. We were also able to prepay funeral arrangements. We discovered, after looking through his car, that his deceased wife, Ida, was buried at Crown Hill, and he had a plot next to her that it was waiting for him, but he had not prepaid any of those arrangements. So we were able to make sure that he was buried next to Ida because of being able to dig into some of his history and find that information. So I hope that describes what I'm saying when I say these people, when they come to us, we're focused on the medical decisions, but they have lives. They have other needs that need to be met once they leave our hospital, and I think it's our responsibility to make sure that they're taken care of once they're discharged too. So I want to say a little bit more about the volunteer advocates. I'll try to speed this up a little bit. So our volunteer advocates, we had 33 volunteers who served the first 50 patients. So when a patient died, if somebody wanted to be reused, we would do that. We had 10 males, 23 females. These were doctors, attorneys, law students, medical students, social workers, people like you who know these patients so well, know our healthcare system so well. A lot of our medical students and law students were so happy for the opportunity because it gave them real on-the-ground experience and insight into our healthcare system and how well it works, and most importantly, how well it doesn't, how hard it is to find social services for these really needy patients, and sometimes the really actually horrible circumstances that people find themselves in nursing homes, especially for the ones who need Medicaid beds. Most of the advocates handled one case at a time. We had the exception with Earl's advocate because both of her little fellows for a while were at the same facility, and she was able to manage that. Earl also thought she was an FBI agent. She was actually a retired manager of a physician's office, so I think the same skills were probably required. But I think that's how she got him to change his clothes once a week because he thought she was an FBI agent. So this wonderful program, where is it now? It has moved to the Center for At-Risk Elders. It's been at the Center for At-Risk Elders for a little bit over a year. And I'm going to invite Ken Bennett, CARE's Executive Director, to come up and tell you a little bit about what CARE is doing.
Hi, everybody. I'm a lawyer. I'll speak in 6-minute increments, okay? The Center for At-Risk Elders is, well, first off, my staff sometimes and my wife ask me, why in the world did you start that? And I blame Robin because we started it in part to provide some legal horsepower to volunteer guardianship programs, and Robin's was the program that we worked with a lot, and she was one that laid the groundwork for such a wonderful program, award-winning program, and so we're just happy to take it over. Today, the Center for At-Risk Elders has about 60 trained volunteers. We have a little more than, I think, as of today, probably 65 to 66 wards. So as you can tell by the numbers there, we're constantly at capacity with our volunteers. And so the staff sometimes serve in what amounts to the volunteer role, at least temporarily, until a volunteer is freed up or can be matched. We are downtown, close to the courthouse, thank goodness, because it's only a half-block walk to the city-county building where the probate court is. We have moved. Our suite number is different from what's presented here. We've moved up to the 11th floor because we needed more space. We have a director of support services who's full-time. We have a program director who's full-time, an associate program director full-time, administrative assistant full-time. We have a part-time accounting person, and we have office volunteers who come in to assist at various levels. We are learning as we go, and I can't emphasize that enough sometimes with folks. And this is true for volunteer programs, I think, throughout the state. And there's about 10 programs of varying sizes around the state. This is the wild, wild west. We do not know. We have no models for how to do this job effectively, cost-effectively. How do we sustain this for periods of time? And so we're constantly learning. We're constantly facing more challenges. What I've come to believe, though, is that these volunteer programs like ours can serve as a good intermediary between healthcare providers and the patient who's incapacitated. Think of us as a sophisticated family member with a bit more clinical detachment to making decisions on behalf of the ward, but who can also dig into the financial picture, dig into the social history, and make decisions that are truly informed consent. Because that's the other reminder I tell folks is that guardians are not there just to give consent, they're there to give informed consent, and that's sometimes a piece which can be missed. So we're actively trying to find new ways of doing this. We've learned a lot in the past 13, 14 months, but we have a lot more yet to learn. We are currently accepting referrals based upon some funding grants from Eskenazi Health and IU Methodist Hospital. It said 59 total volunteers, so that's more accurate, I think, on the slide than it was out of my mouth. There's approximately 60 open cases when I drafted this. We had a flurry of activity past week. We have 4 new folks since last week, so that's how rapidly things change. On Friday, I did 2 emergency guardianships, both of whom involved IU Methodist patients here. We have 4 to 5 training sessions per year for new volunteer recruits. Our next one is coming up October 11. If you are interested in becoming a volunteer, we'd love to have you as a volunteer. We love our volunteers. This one on October 11 is an all-day affair on a Saturday. You can find more information by contacting us at the center. I'm going to give you our website address, which is easy. It's indianacare.org. It is not particularly up to date as a website goes because we're too busy with other things, but that will get you basic information about the organization, and getting a hold of us is easy either by contacting us at the center by calling a phone number or by emailing any of us. I think our email addresses are online. We have maybe a little bit different or add-on services to what the Wishard program was able to do. We're doing guardianship of the estate services as well as guardianship of the person services, and really what I mean by that is that even if there are assets to be managed, we're taking those cases on within our organization. And that sometimes involves $300,000 to manage, and more oftentimes involves $9,000 to $10,000 and a house which may be worth less than that, by the way. And Robin knows the experiences with this, but we have a property team who will go in if there's somebody who has an apartment, a patient who has an apartment or a house. We do have hazmat gear because we oftentimes don't know what we're going to find. I can tell the story about the bed bug lady. I have the cockroach lady. I have the dead cat lady. And so sometimes these are awkward situations, but we get involved to get in there not only to help liquidate the asset if it's one that could have some value for the patient, but also to learn more about them. It becomes a bit of an investigatory action on our part to try and dig in, find financial records, find if there is any prepaid funeral plans, any last wills and testament, all of those types of things that we might find in a person's apartment or house. We are doing, and this is, I think, relatively new still in our experience, but we're doing a lot of Medicaid application processing, and our goal there is to make that so effective in terms of the processing and so efficacious for the hospitals and the nursing facilities that, again, we're helping the providers out, and we expect them to help our wards out in providing good care. And so while we're learning a lot more about that, one of the things we've learned, for instance, is that nobody knows who has the Medicaid application ball, by the way, on a lot of this. We get involved in these cases, and we've learned what the hospital has started a Medicaid application, and the nursing home starts a Medicaid application, and we're left trying to figure out, well, how do they have the information to do the Medicaid application if they're not guardian? Nobody's called us to ask about financial documents and things like that. We're going to try to look for ways of bringing more coherence to that process. There is an added advantage to having us as a public interest law firm do the Medicaid application processing, and that is that, I'll try to say this diplomatically, we don't have to always put up with the Medicaid system when it is doing things that are illegal, when they're doing things which are unconstitutional, that don't even follow their own guidelines and rules. I had one of those just this past week with an administrative law judge hearing on a case that was rejected for failure to cooperate, a very standard way for the Medicaid folks to process these applications and get them out there off of their desk without giving any notice to the applicant, in this case ourselves, of the right for a good cause exception to a failure to cooperate. They don't give notice despite the clear language in the regulations which require it. I have participated in the past with a class action lawsuit against Medicaid here in Indiana because of its violation of various case law, federal case law applicable to the Medicaid program. So the point being is that as we get this Medicaid application processing more effective, we're also able to bring some of that legal horsepower to hold the system accountable because it is having a real effect. The most immediate effect we're finding right now some of the better nursing facilities are refusing to take any patient who's Medicaid pending. And the reason that they are doing that is because the Medicaid system is so chaotic that they don't know when they're going to be paid, if they're going to be paid. Sometimes in the best of circumstances, it can be months and months and months before they receive reimbursement. And so they've begun to lay out this, but we won't take them if they're Medicaid pending. The additional service we've done, we have a volunteer, a highly sophisticated nurse practitioner with vast years of geriatric experience. She and her team have volunteered to provide some quality care audits for us. She has gone into nursing facilities when we have had problems or sensed some problems by reports from the volunteer as to what's going on. And so we empower her to go in as our own quality care person and check on the quality of care in the nursing facility and provide us feedback with which we use to make some decisions. We do have a family guardianship program which is designed to provide pro bono legal services for low-income family guardians. You see my little parenthetical there. Unfortunately, we've suspended that program because it was beginning to overwhelm us. We have no separate funding for the family guardianship program as of yet. We're working on that, but our hope is that if we get that fully funded, we'll be able to provide pro bono legal services to suitable family members who want to step up and serve. This is a rough graph of the intakes that we've received since we took over the program in June of 2013. It has its ups and downs, but you can see the trend line on how rapidly this is increasing on a monthly basis. We're trying to manage that as we go along, but kind of the message there is demand is high, supply is limited. That's the extent of my Economics 101 lessons from Wabash College. So I want to talk about the coalition, the Adult Guardianship Coalition. She's too modest. It was started by Robin Bandy. It brought together SACOA, Aging and In-Home Solutions, together with Families First of Indiana, Mental Health America of Greater Indianapolis, Adult Protective Services, representatives of hospitals, all to come together to try to figure out how do we expand this model of volunteer guardianship programs outside of just the Wishard and Wishard IU Methodist services. How do we get this more broadly based? Well, you'd be surprised to learn, perhaps, that money seems to be a pretty important need. And so what we focused on there was developing so identifying who are the first stakeholders that we want to get to. Hospitals were clearly the first stakeholders. They were a referral source, but they were also a referral source that had skin in the game, in that they were dealing with prolonged, unnecessary bed days because they didn't have a surrogate decision maker to be able to do the discharge planning, and so they were essentially stuck. They were also dealing with new rules pertaining to readmission rates, and there was the studies that showed that when you have surrogate decision makers, your readmission rates can be lowered. And so as a group, we decided, okay, so what is this model that no one's ever created before? What does it look like in practice? And the basic operational model for the coalition, which is not operational as of yet, I'll be clear, but the basic operational model is to leverage the experience of Families First and Mental Health America, which have had guardianship programs for a number of years. They haven't done volunteer guardianship programs, but they've had staff volunteer programs. They know how to do guardianship. And they were focused on permanent guardianships. And so that was wonderful until the state cut off the funding for those programs. And so by necessity, they couldn't take on new referrals for guardianships. So we're looking to use their expertise in managing ongoing permanent guardianships once it's past the emergency phase, using care services to provide the temporary guardianship services on the front end to address the emergency, stabilize the situation, and operationally, we would have SACOA as our fiscal agent to kind of help us. They be the 800-pound gorilla, perhaps providing a source of funds from federal dollars, block grant funds, and things like that. So that's how the model is designed. Care, again, would be the hub. It'd be the referral hub. We would train and recruit and train volunteers. We would do the temporary guardianship, provide the legal horsepower, and then if the guardianship became permanent, we would transition the management of the volunteer over to Families First or Mental Health America. To do that, we defined a budget. What would it take for this operational model to work? We divided that budget estimate by 5 because we thought we might be able to get 5 of the hospitals in Marion County to join us, and we came up with a number. We've presented that number to the hospitals. Eskenazi Health has signed on. Community Hospitals has signed on just recently. IU Methodist, we're still working on that. We do continue with the contract separately with IU Methodist through the balance of this year, but we're trying to see if we'll be able to reach agreement on those funds for starting in 2015. The VA hospital is virtually a done deal, we're told. They've been very anxious to get on board as well, so we think that they're going to be a participant, what we refer to as a grantor hospital or a subscriber hospital. Adult Protective Services is also a referral source, and we're using some limited state funds that are available for us to provide services for APS referrals, and that has been well received by the folks distributing those state funds. There could be others that we expect to have referrals from. We don't yet know how to go to them to help financially sustain this program. Financial sustainability is quite key for us because getting the guardianship may take a matter of a few days or a few weeks, but if guardianships can go on for 5 or 10 or 15 years, we have to be in it for the long haul for our wars, and so we need to have a model to do that. This is where part of your slides, but we're going to quickly just going to get a recap here so we can have questions and answers. The state of Indiana has wanted to follow this volunteer model approach. The task force, which Robin mentioned, is a group of a number of stakeholders, from judges, lawyers, doctors, agencies, area agencies on aging, other state agencies that have been involved to try to promote the development of these volunteer programs. There was a study commissioned and performed an empirical study done by the University of Notre Dame Law School a couple of years back that took a look at 1,100 guardianship cases in Indiana, actually got into the hard files to see how guardianship was being practiced in Indiana by lawyers and judges. It was not a pretty sight for the most part. We have a long ways to go to improving the quality of those services around the state. But the task force also developed kind of a game plan to shift policy towards supporting volunteer programs. And its first success was promoting the adoption of an Office of Adult Guardianship with the Indiana State Supreme Court's State Court Administration, which is the administrative arm of our Supreme Court. That office has been created as of last year. And in addition, there have been funds allocated by the legislature for 2013, 2014, and now 2014, 2015, that amounts to $350,000 available for the volunteer programs around the state. No good model for how you divide that up, and so they've essentially divided it equally, which is the little funds I talked about. We get $38,000 from the state under that grant. It can't do much, but it does a bit, and our hope is that with the Office of Adult Guardianship in place, now that it's staffed, now that the Supreme Court is vested in wanting to help promote volunteer guardianship programs, the camel's nose is under the tent, as they say, and hopefully we'll be able to pursue more funding from state resources. So we have a long ways to go in that regard, but what we're doing here in Marion County, because of the work of Robin, because of the support of folks like IU Methodist and Eskenazi Hospital over the past several years, is we've been able to create a model which, if we get good at it, and some of these services we can begin to replicate in other counties around the state and hopefully begin to serve our unbefriended population